So whichever type of school you do choose, state, independent or Catholic, it's important for families to be involved in considerations about the support and, if relevant, the process of applying for funding support. You as the family know your family member best and will be able to provide valuable insights that make it more likely that your child will receive the appropriate type and amount of support. The support we're talking about only relates to regular classes in the New South Wales state schools. So in New South Wales state schools, all students are supported to access educational opportunities via a wide range of programs and provisions available to all students experiencing learning difficulties. Some of these provisions are new and were introduced via an initiative that you may have heard about, Every Student, Every School. It's actually a couple of years now. For students who have confirmed disabilities, are attending a regular class full-time and have additional support needs, beyond the supports available to the general school, there is also another type of funding, which is that second one, Integration Funding Support Program. Funding support is also sometimes referred to as the Integrated Funding Support Program that's mentioned there, and these programs and the supports available to all students. So both of those funding bands can be used for a student that's got the independent funding as well. Also be aware that there's funding that can be accessed for other things like technology, building works and transport, and they are done separately. So I will now provide a little bit more detail about the sort that we've just talked about there. So that first one, learning and support for all students. So for any students experiencing difficulties in learning in regular classes, there are a range of approaches a school can take to support their learning. These supports are meant to be flexible and involve a minimum of bureaucracy or red tape. So you don't need to prove your child has a disability or have any IQ testing or anything of that nature. There's no application or assessment needs to be made to access it. It's funding that is allocated to schools for them to use for their whole student population. So what kind of support can be accessed if you're experiencing difficulties? Well, the learning and support teachers are intended to play a significant role in working collaboratively with teachers around such things as planning, implementing and monitoring personalised adjustments for learning as required. They can provide specialist advice. They can provide direct support to students with additional needs. They can assist with professional learning for the classroom teacher. And they can consider things like peer tutoring and other alternative processes to help support the students. School principals are responsible through their learning and support teams for determining how the school's resources are best used to meet the learning needs of all the students in the school, and is expected that the learning support teacher will work in consultation with parents to ensure the best outcomes. So the intention is that classroom teachers will have access to support and learning, and students will have access to well-supported teachers and specialists in school assistance as needed. Students being supported in these ways include students with mild intellectual disability, students with language disorder or delay, and students with autism or mental health disorders who have lower level needs for additional learning. But again, there's no need for a confirmed disability to access this type of support. Yes, this is in public schools. And we will send more links to this after the webinar as well. Okay, so the second type of funding I talked about is the Integrated Funding Support Program. So funding support is for students who need additional support and have an identified disability. And the disability is defined by the New South Wales Department of Education and Communities criteria, which is available via our website as well as the DSD. For some of your children, more intensive support may be needed to access the curriculum in a meaningful way. The DEC materials suggest that students receiving this targeted funding support have labels that include moderate or severe intellectual disability, moderate, high or complex needs in autism or mental health disorders, physical disability, hearing impairment and vision impairment. So please note this still does not require your child to have further assessments or IQ testing. And if you have further queries on this, contact us and we can discuss it with you further. So how can this support be accessed and what can this additional funding be used for? So approved use of that integrated funding, which is then funding that's applied to an individual student. Things such as teacher release time so that they can have time for preparing and planning, especially around the adjustments that may be needed to be made. additional teacher time, training and development of teachers, employment of the school learning support officer, which was previously known as the teacher's aide, and any program coordination time. So note that the school learning support officer, which was the teacher's aide role, is not the same as the learning support teacher that I was talking about earlier. A school learning support officer does not need formal teaching qualifications. Some schools think of funding support only in terms of the school learning support officer time, so it is good for you to have an idea of other possibilities so you can discuss these when you attend meetings. The Department of Education Communities website also describes the role of the school learning support officer, and we will just touch on that role now because it can be given a lot of emphasis, but can actually be unhelpful if it's not used as intended. So the school learning support officer, under the supervision and direction of a teacher, a SLSO officer, the officer assists in classroom activities and school routines and the care and management of students with disabilities and behaviour support needs. Their role includes assisting teachers in implementation of individual education programs and individual goals that are set, providing opportunities for students to develop personal, social independent living and pre-vocational skills, and attending to the personal care needs of students. So really think of the role as an aid to the teacher so that the teacher can then better teach all the classroom learners. So Gina, hopefully we'll have a clear connection here and you can comment on Mac's school learning support officer and how he or she has been best utilised for Mac's needs.
So Mac's had quite a few SLSOs over the course of primary school, which hasn't been a bad thing. They've all brought different skills to the table. It's really good insight to know that the actual role is there for the teacher and not for the student. It helps you get be less precious about that role, and you can use that language in any conversations to show that you understand what the role of the I'll use teacher's aide just it's a bit easier. Teacher's aide is for you to know they're not there to babysit or to take the place of the trained professional in the room. So they're not there to really define the learning outcomes. And you know, you might have a great aide, but you know, you just have to see how things are going. One thing we've always had in Mac's IEP is for Mac to become an independent learner. So if you can imagine that one day he could receive all the relevant learning information in a manner that he could access in his inbox, on his computer or device, and he could access it and work on it at his level without needing an adult to be there, you know, and put that on his device at that moment in time. And let's face it, a peer could throw that information onto his computer if it wasn't already in his inbox. You know, what if one day he only needed aid support for the feeding and personal care requirements because he could access all those educational needs independently? And having that on his IEP as a constant, it's been there since kindergarten, has been a really powerful goal. You know, if he doesn't need paid support 100% of the time, that means there's all that space for natural supports to come about. You know, already Mac has some time each day without aid support, and it's just amazing to watch his peers and his mates take over. They set up his equipment, they troubleshoot it, they pack his bag at the end of the day, they pass on messages, they pop notes in, and it's all very natural. No one's rostered to do it. They just do it. And if someone's away, someone else slides into that role. Or even this morning, dropping him off to school, different kids were taking him out to fitness, and a couple of kids that have obviously got very used to it sort of said, well, what's going on here? And so, you know, it's that it's not trying to do the SLSO out of their job, but it's recognising that you don't want them to block those natural supports.
So, Gina, would you say having your vision so clear and the way you think about it in terms of the decisions and the queries that you put to yourself when you're thinking about Mac's support needs has really helped in terms of you developing a relationship with that SLOs that's allowed for those peer activities and involvement that you just mentioned?
Absolutely. And one of the things we did one year, we actually had his IEP meeting, and we covered off all the academic learning sides of things. And then, you know, normally the social aspect is this quick little tick box at the end, and things weren't going so well. It wasn't working so well in the playground for Mac. And so we actually requested a specific meeting, an IEP meeting to discuss this. Mac's social side of things at school. And so we reconvened, I think it was a week later, and talked about all the social aspects and how that could work, and what was going on and where the problems lay. So it was, and that then changed the role of the SLSO into coming out into the playground and helping facilitate some better social interactions. So it was being really clear that was a role they'd never used an SLSO for. And now, you know, the school would say that's changed. They can see how important that is for not just Mac. Mac doesn't need anyone in the playground now. So that frees up that SLSO to work with other kids who might be just struggling in the playground. And that's a great outcome for more than just Mac.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really powerful use of having that vision so clear, is that, you know, changing the whole way of using that resource in the school. Instead of having that resource prescribed that they can do this and this and this for a particular student, it's saying, well, actually, this student requires these kind of needs, and this is why we want that way, and utilising the resource in a meaningful way, and then it becomes a meaningful and relevant resource for Mac, right? Moving on, just in terms of a little bit more on the funding, this is the cover of the funding support document that is part of the application to receiving integrated funding. So an application must be made to be approved for this targeted funding support, and we thought it might be useful to actually talk briefly about what's involved and refer to a couple of sections so that you can go back to them later. We will be sending a link to this document that you can see on the screen now. And in fact, the first 8 pages of this document very clearly set out much of the information that is helpful for you to read prior to attending any funding support meeting that you may have, or any application being put through. So here are some of the main points to be familiar with. Okay, the target population. So to be considered for support, students must be enrolled in and attending a regular class on a full-time basis and have an identified disability as defined by the New South Wales Department of Education and Training. Community. It's important to note that a diagnosis of disability does not automatically mean that a student or the school requires additional funding support. To be eligible, students must have essential educational needs that are directly related to their identified disability and that cannot be met. And we'll give you an idea of what those needs are in a moment. The next one, when to apply. So the new application for this funding is required only at key transition points, so entering school, between years 6 and 7, or if support needs change, such as an illness or surgery, etc. But it does not need to be applied for annually. The parental involvement. The document is very, very clear that parental involvement is expected in the application process. And you really want to be part of that process and make sure that the needs of your son and daughter are being considered well, and not letting the school just do it on your behalf, even if it does seem easy, because they don't know your son or daughter the way you do. Determining the allocation. So the level of support is determined by the University of Newcastle, not the school. So the school cannot tell you what funding level will be provided. They just put the application through. It has to go through the school with your involvement, but then it goes to the University of Newcastle for all of the state applications, and then that gets sent back to the individual schools as to what allocation is being received for that student. And there is an opportunity to review it. So if you're not happy with the funding decision, there is a process set out in the document on page 7. First, the school seeks a review, and then the family can appeal if the school review isn't successful. The integrated funding is applied for by the school, or through the school, I should say, but you as the parent need to be part of that process. And that's what we talked about on in parental involvement, so page 2. So we will send you this document. You can have a look. Those first 8 pages are sort of the key ones to get this kind of information. And you can always call us to get a little bit more clarity around it if you need to. So I said I'd mention what the educational needs are. So these are under the area of domain and focus areas. Page 3 of the application goes through these domain and focus areas, and you can see here an overview that will be considered to determine the assessment outcome. It's useful for families to read the description of typical students for each domain and focus area and have an idea about where you think your child best fits. You won't decide the level, but this pre-planning can enable a more thoughtful discussion and assistance in getting the funding support level right. And these domains and focus areas are set out in full from page 9 onwards. So as you can see here, the focus areas are around curriculum, around communication needs, and around participation, both social and safety. The other 2 areas, main domains, are around personal care needs and movement and mobility. Okay. Other funding. So funding for technology, building works and transport doesn't come under a child's funding support dollars, and there are separate applications that would need to be made for any of those other areas. Technology, so like computers and communication devices, etc., require another form to be completed, and schools need to demonstrate the need for the technology and say how the equipment will be used. Building works come from a different bucket of money again, and note that building work can be notoriously slow. So hence earlier in terms of applications and enrolments better for any kind of building work, ramps, etc., that may be needed for your sons and daughters. And you can also apply for travel assistance if your child is in a regular class. So that may be something that's of use and help to you as well. So the funding for Catholic and independent schools operates differently. They are largely funded via the Commonwealth, while the state schools are funded via the New South Wales State Government mainly. So regardless of the type of school or the funding source, the New South Wales Board of Study covers curriculum for all schools, so state, independent and Catholic. It's a national curriculum that we have. And particularly for those of you interested in independent and Catholic, we've just got a very quick tour here. So on your screen is the Catholic Diocese of New South Wales, which is divided into 11 dioceses. And the Catholic Education Commission of New South Wales provides a direction at a state level and manages the areas such as funding contracts, while each diocese is responsible for the regional and functional decisions. So talk to your local Catholic school and then decide as to, you could talk to the Catholic Education Commission around the funding areas and the diocese around the functional areas of the school's decisions and policies, etc. So very much like an independent school, you do need to talk to the school separately around how the funding works for them and what you can expect for your child. With the AIS, or Association of Independent Schools, independent schools are named that way because they do all operate very differently. There is an association, however, where schools can access that for training and guidance, and they do administer government programs, including targeted programs around language, numeracy and special needs. So in talking to families, the experiences people have are very varied between the settings and seemingly regardless of the amount of financial support their children have received. So we've heard from some people having really positive and supportive experiences in all contexts, and also experiences that were not so positive in all the different school settings. So the major difference seems to be the family's relationship with the school, and families having a clear idea of what they want and holding very firm to their position, as well as the attitude within the school. So whatever the setting, it's important for you to get involved in considerations about support and the process of applying for any funding support, as you know your child best and will be able to provide important insights that make it more likely your child will receive the appropriate amount. Tell the school that you want to be involved and have it clear that it's an expectation you're involved. So get a copy of the funding documents, whichever settings that there might be, and read it before meeting with the school and think about what you might say and where you see your child fits within those funding buckets that they may have. You can offer to bring useful information and reports, etc., but do keep in mind to be cautious about the representation of your son and daughter and the language used, because you do want it to be very positive and that your son and daughter's needs and are met as a young boy or girl in school, as opposed to a disability concern and label. So we know that was a reasonably quick overview, but we will send links to this information. And of course, as we've said a few times, please talk to us to clarify anything further.